Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of OpenObservability Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Horovits, and here at OpenObservability Talks, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. So may the open source be with you. And let's go straight to today's episode. VictoriaMetrics is a long-standing open source project for metrics monitoring. I've hosted here on the show Aliaksandr Valialkin, co-founder and CTO, but it was over 2 years ago, and since then the project has made a fascinating journey from monitoring to observability, and the VictoriaMetrics project now has new siblings, if you will. So I thought it's good time to revisit the project here at OpenObservability Talks, and this time with the other co-founder, Roman Khavronenko. So let me invite Roman to the stream. Hey, Roman, good morning.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for joining me. We just met in Munich, but you're now joining us from your home base in Poland, right? Where from?
Yeah, it's Poland, Krakow. That's right.
Yeah, sounds good. So as I mentioned in the opening notes, really it was a great chat with Alexander, but back in the day. But since then, you've expanded your tool suite. Now you have logging and metrics and so on. So and traces. But before jumping into what you built, which I'm curious to hear about, but first I'm curious to hear about the why. Why did you do that? That's a long-standing focused discussion, like in the industry, about focused solution in the metric space, such as Prometheus. That's been, I guess, your main goalpost in a sense. InfluxDB and others that are very well focused on metrics, and then end users to compose these different zoomed-in components. So what drove you to expand beyond your specialty in metrics?
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, I think it's always driven by engineering curiosity and this internal will to make things better. Initially, VictoriaMetrics was created as a better thing to other solutions that existed at that time. So if people remember how VictoriaMetrics was created, me and Alexander were working together, and we were using Prometheus to monitor our internal infrastructure. And we started seeing some bottlenecks and inability to scale, and Alexander got idea how that can be done better. Well, after a few years, we got VictoriaMetrics. It is fine now. Many people use it, and I really appreciate what community does for us and how they use the product. That's the best thing you can get from open source. It's when people love the product. But Alexander is our CTO. He's engineer in his role, and what he's doing at the company is mostly in engineering work. He didn't switch to managing position. He still expended most of his time writing code and thinking on something, on creating something better. And logs solution was like the next step for him. So he had this vast experience of creating VictoriaMetrics as a distributed metrics database. And of course, he made most of the decisions there. Not of all those decisions were perfect. And he decided to reuse that experience and made a log database, which will be free from those not ideal design decisions, make it better. And also there was like there was no open source perfect log database. It will never be. But when you compare yourself to other solutions that are on the market, you always see the cons, you always see the downsides. And if you're like engineer inside, you know that you can try at least to do better. And I think Alexander made it. He achieved really great results with the performance and maintainability of the VictoriaLogs. And yeah, I really think that VictoriaLogs will go far beyond what VictoriaMetrics could have.
Nice. So the first joiner, I guess, and the new crowd, the new round is VictoriaLogs, as you mentioned. So tell us a bit more about what VictoriaLogs is about and why is that so differentiated, as you hinted just now.
Yeah. So VictoriaLogs is a database for logs. You can push logs into VictoriaLogs with a variety of ingestion protocols, as it is integrated with almost everything that you know, every collector, including OpenTelemetry collector for logs, of course. You can push data in, and then you can query it at fascinating speed. VictoriaLogs, at the same time, is horizontally scalable. You can scale it to insane sizes, but it still remains very, very much efficient, no matter what. It provides superior compression, superior query speed. We had users on public media in the blue sky saying that they replaced Elasticsearch cluster with one binary of VictoriaLogs. We've seen public benchmarks by other users comparing Loki and VictoriaLogs, and they were claiming like 10 times more higher, better query speed for VictoriaLogs, 3-4 times better compression, etc. So what we aim with VictoriaLogs is the same as VictoriaMetrics. It's to have a scalable, high-performance, cost-efficient database, which is easy to maintain. And VictoriaLogs is even easier to maintain than VictoriaMetrics right now. So yeah, that's if you want improve your logging stack, if you want it to be fast and scalable and efficient, just try VictoriaLogs. It's completely open source, Apache 2 license with clustered version, everything you need. And right now we're working on the S3 integration, so it could be able to read data from S3 and upload all the partitions to S3.
Nice. So let's go a step deeper. You gave us all the highlights, superior query speeds and all that. But so you created essentially your own designated storage for logs, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And there's also always this discussion out in the industry about unified storage across the signals versus specialized stores. Each one has its advantages, of course. So can you share with us a bit more about the design considerations leading to this choice and this way to implement?
Yeah, so in engineering, everything you do has trade-offs. Always, any decision you make will work in some cases better and other cases worse. So with unified databases, like general purpose databases, mostly people talk about ClickHouse that can unite all three signals or even more. And you can store all the telemetry in the ClickHouse. And the pros of having this approach is that you run one technology for everything. And you don't need to learn any other technologies. If you know how to scale ClickHouse, if you know how to configure ClickHouse, it's easier for you to run this one technology. It also provides the same interface for querying data back. You can use SQL for querying metrics, logs, and traces. You can correlate them, even if they are like in the different, these signals could be in different tables. You can join them. You can do these correlations in flight in the queries. Yes, of course. And this is like a good thing, good positive factors of this decision to have it unified. It also has a downside, though, since ClickHouse is not specialized on this telemetry signals. How it will work depends mostly on you and on your skill to configure ClickHouse, to work with this technology. If you chose bad table design decision, if you configure ClickHouse in the wrong way, well, that's all comes to you afterwards. Also, ClickHouse still remains unspecialized for any of these workloads, any of these telemetry signals. So sometimes you would have to add additional things that could like reshape data in flight before ingesting to ClickHouse. Or there are many cases when you will have to do manually intervene to make the data good or the tables or the data structure good in ClickHouse.
So if we switch to your design, I don't to. We had, by the way, episodes about ClickHouse, and it's and so I want to, but I want to really zoom in on your design decisions, and I think you gave us perspective. Obviously, you have nothing against ClickHouse; it's just an example. But what I'm saying is that, like you went as engineers, as you said. Ultimately, we're all engineers, and I know Alexander, that's the prototypical engineer. So I'm sure that you tried lots of different approaches, and especially with the existing a code base that you had around VictoriaMetrics implementation. So how did you find that right design approach to tackle logs? I'm curious about what the journey that you had to reach and what design you came up with, of course, at the end.
Okay. I thought you're mostly asking about why not one database for all the signals.
Yeah, I'm saying which is the trade-offs. I assume you face the same trade-offs when you needed to choose what's your way to implement. So, like, put us in your shoes as engineering and the architects deciding, okay, we want to now have a log implementation. We already have a metrics implementation, time series data. How do we go about it? What do we reuse? Why do we go with a separate data store? How do we represent it? And how do we tackle the other sides, as you said, like correlation and things that come less naturally when it's two stores? I'm curious about this journey that you went through.
Right. So the decision to make VictoriaLogs was mostly based on the dissatisfaction of open source community with existing solutions, or not dissatisfaction, struggles they had to face every day. And because we had to face those struggles with metric solution, we had an idea as how we can convert this into something new that could solve people's problem, be simple to run and efficient to run. That's why VictoriaLogs was created. Of course, it wasn't like, hey, I will just create a new database. No, we analyzed the existing solutions. And as with metrics, there was like a big period of research of understanding what people need and what they most struggle with. Like in the Loki, you have this stream concept that allows you to filter logs efficiently, but that stream concept is very vulnerable to cardinality. If you will put high cardinality label field name into the stream, you will face bad consequences afterwards, as like big memory usage or slow queries and overall reliability of the solution, like things like this. And people tend to put high cardinality things, like the more configuration you will need to provide to your database, the more potential mistakes users can make. The same with ClickHouse, the same with Loki. And intention with VictoriaLogs was to make it super, super simple, but at the same time powerful. Like to take those complicated decisions for the user inside internally and hide it. Initially, it started internally in VictoriaMetrics project on the GitHub. VictoriaLogs was part of it. It was using the similar libraries, and it was just in the same structure as VictoriaMetrics. But after some time, we've seen that actually logs are very different to the metric signal. And we had to put some optimization specifically to log signals, some additional configuration specifically to log signals. And that started to intervene what metrics needed in their libraries and what logs needed in their libraries. That's why after some time that we made a decision to move VictoriaLogs to a separate project. And right now it's hosted as VictoriaMetrics/VictoriaLogs GitHub project. We still share some libraries, but mostly VictoriaLogs is separate because log signal is different and query pattern is different. It requires different optimization techniques. It requires a bit different libraries. It has a different set of command line flags to configure. And that's why they were separated. And that also answers a bit question, why not unified database? Because metrics and logs, they have different ingestion requirements and query patterns. That will be like different resource usage patterns too. So separating them as a separate databases gives more flexibility on how you can configure that and for what you can be prepared with, rather than uniting everything in one. So
interesting. So essentially, it's a fascinating journey. That's exactly what I was curious, because essentially, so you started something that was much more tightly coupled with VictoriaMetrics implementation, and sort of during the design and implementation, you realized all these places where they diverge, the behaviors, the patterns are different, and sort of it amounted to a critical mass that said, okay, this doesn't belong as part of VictoriaMetrics. It should be its own thing. So it's more different than similar. So maybe some libraries are similar, but the vast majority, it should be separate. That's like sort of to summarize what you said, right?
Exactly. And also with the starting new projects, completely new projects, you have this unique opportunity in open source and engineering starting from scratch. So every project that like every open source project with time, it becomes more and more complex. I would say like its entropy increases because there are like more feature requests, more unexpected corner cases discovered. All that gets reflected in the database, in the code base, and that code base becomes more and more complex. And sometimes, even if you fix in some things, that's basically because you made mistakes in the past, and now you need to carry that backward compatibility with you all the time. We start in VictoriaLogs from scratch in a separate repo. You can start it clean, like without having that legacy from the VictoriaMetrics libraries. And yeah, just make it optimal and fresh and as lean as possible, which is a good opportunity for every engineer.
Yeah. By the way, it's when we talk about logs, we're talking about full text search capabilities for logs.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, because you mentioned so Loki as a reference. I think this was also a different, I guess, design philosophy that was more following the labeling approach, the more structured data that was similar, I guess, to the spirit of Prometheus metrics in their case in Grafana Labs design decisions. So again, different design decisions. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm just saying different trade-offs. In your case, you found the need for like full text search, like these blobs of message bodies or things like that necessary, right?
Well, it works in both way. You can ingest structured log, and then everything will be stored as a separate field and will be compressed appropriately to this field type. And it is the best way, of course, to ingest data. You can also show just unstructured logs as blobs, and the search will still work. You can also reshape those blobs in flight using your in the query. You can parse those fields. Like if you ingest in log FMT, you can just parse it in log FMT, and then you will have this in-flight parse to the structured log, and then you can filter by specific fields, do configuration, etc. But again, for the user, it is simple because users don't care that much. It can just push any data that it wants. If they use collectors that push structured logs, that would be ideal. But you can also push unstructured logs, and it will also work. You will be still able to find your errors or any other anomalies and see them on the graphs. So, yeah.
No, it makes sense, and I think again, I'm an advocate of having more structure in logs and not using these flat files and plain text and all of that. But reality has it that we're still far away from this day in time that the majority is structured. We still have a lot of legacy logs out there that you can't change, or you use some third parties and so on. And I find it still realistically something. Of course, if you can at least at ingestion time put some structure into it, like what people do with Grok or things like that. And then at least when you store it, you already store it with some more structure than the original log that saves like the performance on query time structuring. But as you said, some users just prefer to dump all their logs there and don't mess with that during ingestion time, and just and are willing to sustain, I guess, the penalties of the extra processing during query time. So did you see, by the way, I'm curious actually from your experience with your users of the project, do you see what are the practices that you see now? I know it's a relatively new project, but still it's already a couple of years. What do you see? Most users just dump raw logs. Do they try to do some structuring, or what? Or do you see trend over time that more and more they move into structured logs? I'm curious, what's your observation there?
I think it depends on the scale. Like if we talk about low scale, like just showing logs from like home labs or some old projects, but they don't emit a lot of telemetry. They don't care about it being structured. They just get used to the like old like grabbing technique where you grab logs and you search over like that. And VictoriaLogs perfectly allows them to do that. We have CLIs that acts as a grab, and you can take logs from it and apply this filtering pipes in the same way as you do with grab and other Unix utilities. But when people go at bigger scale and they need to ingest petabytes of data, you have to go to the structured logging because it's just too much data. And without logs being structured, you can't compress them that well because those fields, they are not stored in the columns of different types. If you know that if you separate it on ingestion, all the fields in their specific columns, you can apply the best compression for the data type in that column. And that's very efficiently, because it's not only how much on disk you will spend, it's also how fast you can read that. Because if it's compressed on the disk well, then you spend less time reading that from the disk. And then unpacking is usually easier. So well-compressed data improves query speed significantly too. And as you mentioned, if you're working with the structured logs on the query time, it's much easier to apply filtering. The queries will be faster. Yeah, right.
And anyway, then you can leave the blob also untouched, because you can do all the querying, and especially if it's like analytics type, like if you do like all these sums and averages and all of that, or whatnot on some metric like numeric field. You can leave and you extract it, you put it in a separate field, and then in many cases you don't even need the extra information from the main message. You can leave it compressed, and it's efficient in storage. And usually it's only needed after you find this is the log that you need. Then you pass it downstream, and there you can then unpack it. So it's pretty convenient. Right. And you mentioned the querying. I think it's also a good opportunity, because one of the design decisions you've made is essentially to come up with your own query language, right? LogsQL. Also, by the way, following. So maybe, and this is actually a different design decision than what you've made with VictoriaMetrics, where you had largely, with some exceptions, I guess, but following PromQL, which is like by Prometheus. So here, you found the need to come up with a new also query language, not just the underlying engine. Can you share with us a bit again about first the why, before talking about what's the design that you found effective?
Yeah, that's a complicated decision. I'm not the best expert on this, because it took from Aliaksandr many months to make this decision. As you mentioned, with VictoriaMetrics, we just supported PromQL, and it gave a great boost in adoption in the community, because most of people still using Prometheus data source in Grafana to query data from VictoriaMetrics, only because this compatibility exists. With VictoriaLogs, we had a choice to implement Loki query language, because a lot of people using Loki, and being compatible with Grafana also makes it like it's a huge advantage to be able to use Loki data source in Grafana. However, after Aliaksandr research, he compared many query languages for logs, and his decision was that none of them is optimal for everyday working with logs. Like, he is a huge fan of old-fashioned way to tail and grab logs, and he tried to move this pipeline philosophy from the Unix utilities to query language for logs. And he called it LogsQL. Of course, that made us incompatible with Loki data source. And we had to go through the extra stretch of making our own data source for Grafana and licensing it on the marketplace, which is very not easy thing to do, and also expensive. However, we believed and still believe that LogsQL will become much more adopted in the future, just because it's much easier to use and more like easier to understand compared to Loki query language.
It's interesting, and I have to say that I've seen a similar process. I'm also involved in the OpenSearch project, as you know, and the similar, I guess, design considerations and trade-offs were there, and also, but reaching down to the same conclusion that the piped processing language makes a lot of sense, especially for DevOps folks. So, by the way, it's even called piped processing language, PPL, because like the way that I guess DevOps folks think about, or I think engineers in general, but I'm saying, like, for example, if you put it against or versus, let's say, how database folks think about when they use SQL, or when, I don't know, researchers and AI folks use when they do Python stuff. Usually you start with the source, and then you start like the Unix philosophy, just like you said, and then you start running like you do sorting, you do filtering, you do some sort of an aggregation, and then like you do step by step. Each time you add another analytic step. Maybe you go back a step, you go forward. Like it's sort of an experimental way of progressing with your investigation, which I really relate to what you said. The Unix philosophy lends itself, and also be honest, the Unix also educated us to also it made this accessible with the piping logic that made sense. So I guess also whoever grew with this CLI just will feel natural. So it's interesting to see different projects and different engineering teams coming to the same conclusion. Maybe in that regard, I'm curious, did you think about taking this philosophy throughout and making it something that is even cross-cutting across the signals? For example, with PPL, the goal is to have it the same philosophy and the same piping language and all that, but across the signals. So I'm curious. I know that the origin was PromQL and it came with the logs QL for VictoriaLogs, but are you thinking maybe roadmap-wise or vision-wise to create? Because you said you believe that this will be the one that will take hold further down the road.
No, I personally don't think it makes sense to have a unified language for all the three signals, like traces, metrics, and logs, mostly because they have different nature and different. I'm use them differently. When I'm talking about logs, I'm mostly interested in two things: in finding the exact row log and check what the error message was, like reading the text, finding that row event. And second is calculating stats over something, like how many of those events happened based on these transformations and these reduced techniques, etc. With metrics, it's different. With metrics, I'm looking for the state of the system. I'm not interested in row events or row observation. You never query row metrics. Those metrics are always preprocessed. If we talk about Prometheus API, which VictoriaMetrics is currently relying on /query range, those APIs are never meant to return anything raw. They return in always something preprocessed, something shifted in time. Some points are not really existent, even if you query them. They're like Prometheus will put you some ephemeral data points. And all this is like pointing to tracking the state of the system rather than understanding separate events. And here logs are events, metrics are the state. And therefore you have different patterns on querying these signals. I'm completely satisfied with PromQL. It could missing some functions, but functions is not actually the core of the language. The way how you select metric names right now and filter and labels, and how you calculate some derivatives from that is completely perfect. And usually PromQL doesn't require anything complicated. I've seen very huge queries, of course, but that's mostly because of the data model, because it's hard to put enough metadata into the time series, or when you join different time series, then you come up with these complicated things. But in its nutshell, querying metrics is very simple compared to querying logs. Logs are more about event-oriented query language. And for traces, it's even simpler. For traces, you're always interested in finding a specific trace ID. And Jaeger API and Tempo API, they both focus on finding specific traces, or finding traces that belongs to spawn, or finding traces that had some specific events on them. That's mostly never about statistics, mostly never about conversion into something. So their APIs are pretty much simpler than logs and, of course, metrics APIs.
Yeah. By the way, it's interesting. Even tools that were designated for metrics, like InfluxDB, for example, taking a whole different philosophy on its query language, although it's designated for time series data and querying it, but a whole different thing. So it's interesting how different engineering teams reached different design decisions even before trying to unify across signals. So and you also provide the integration with InfluxDB, right? Or I remember seeing something.
Only on ingestion, not on querying.
Okay, gotcha. And you touched traces, so maybe it's a good segue to mention. You introduced VictoriaLogs, and then a year after, I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken, you introduced VictoriaTraces that is actually built on top of VictoriaLogs, as I understand, right? Tell us a bit about VictoriaTraces.
Exactly. So VictoriaTraces is basically a fork of VictoriaLogs, and it shares probably 99% of the code with VictoriaLogs. An additional 1% of the code is support of Jaeger API and Traces ingestion protocols. And now, if I'm not mistaken, we're working on Tempo API too, so to support both data sources in Grafana. Why we decided to use VictoriaLogs for traces, because traces in essentially are just wide events, like just events with many logs. And that was fitting ideally into VictoriaLogs. We never actually planned to create VictoriaTraces. I've just seen an opportunity of trying to store traces in the VictoriaLogs and see what performance will be. I asked in our team what it would be nice to try, and thankfully we had an engineer who was passionate about traces. His name is Jacob, and he tried it, and it worked. And it's right now traces are like running on with the same performance or even better performance compared to ClickHouse or to Tempo, and we're pretty satisfied with that. The things that we're working on is just improving compatibility and covering more corner cases, if any. So that was pretty interesting experience of getting that.
Yeah, I guess it makes perfect sense, because logs, or you can think of traces essentially, or spans as structured logs essentially. So definitely a lot makes a lot of sense to build it on top of the logs. Definitely much more so than metrics and logs that we discussed before. And you mentioned the wide events. And I'm curious, we haven't actually delved into that, but when you came into your design solution for the logs, which also serves for the traces, is that sort of a columnar wide event type of data store? Do you want to say a word about your what you came up with at the end?
Yes, that's correct. VictoriaLogs was also inspired by this wide event philosophy, where every field is stored in a separate column, and then you can optimize those columns on storing and reading and compressing, of course. And also you can have the per column caches that help you to filter by, so you can know what unique values are stored within that column, and it improves the query speed very much when you need to find like a needle in the stack. So yeah, we fans of wide events philosophy, and VictoriaLogs incorporates that too.
Nice. And with ClickHouse, I think actually I saw the logo somewhere on the slide. So you support ingestion from ClickHouse, or what kind of support you provide for ClickHouse?
I don't really know what you're telling, but I know that we collaborated with not actually collaborated. So ClickHouse has the ClickBench, if I'm not mistaken, the public resource where they benchmarking various databases based on these things. And when Aliaksandr was building VictoriaLogs, he also decided to put VictoriaLogs into that benchmark. And in that benchmark, VictoriaLogs used as an analytical database. So he made that data that is ingested into all other databases. It can also be ingested in VictoriaLogs and then run analytical queries to find like needle in the stack or whatever. And it shows very well in that ClickBench. Like it was, I don't remember on what place was. It was like in top 10. I don't remember the exact place. I just remember that it was showing much better than anyone expected in that. Not exactly about logs benchmark.
Yeah, no, I actually remember when we in the conference that we were at in Munich. I think it's your colleague Dmitro Kozlov. He had the presentation. I saw he had like a very nice, impressive slide with lots of logos where you folks contribute in different open source projects in the ecosystem. So I saw their ClickHouse and I was curious what you did with that. And by the way, there were other open source projects there and cloud native projects such as Kubernetes, Istio, Telegraph. Can you share what you do in these fronts?
You mean in question whether we contribute to those projects?
Yeah, so I'm saying I saw that on the slide. I didn't have a chance to ask him after the talk what exactly it is, but I was curious. Also, as a CNCF ambassador, seeing that you folks are involved in this project was a great news for me, and I was happy to hear. So, if there's anything that you can share about that, that'd be great for the audience.
Yeah, so as a company, we do not actually cooperate with ClickHouse, but we, as a company, we also consist of different people and different engineers, and those engineers contributed into different projects. I myself contributed in ClickHouse. Aliaksandr contributed into ClickHouse. We contributed in many other products, like I contributed in Prometheus and Grafana too. And probably that slide was about that, but I don't really remember that slide, so I won't be.
No, it's okay. It's just I was curious because it was very impressive to see how many projects you're invested in, so or involved in. So, and you mentioned Grafana a few times. I think Grafana is another design choice you've made early on. Sort of Grafana as the visualization layer. So I'm curious. By the way, one of the logos on that slide was also Perseus, which is sort of, I guess, another project in the visualization layer. So I'm curious if it's something that you're looking into expanding beyond Grafana, or what do you do around Perseus in that front, if you know?
We already have plugins for logs in Perseus, so you can use Perseus to query logs from VictoriaLogs, and for metrics you can use just Prometheus plugin. Nice. There is no need to have VictoriaMetrics. So yeah, Perseus can be used for that.
Okay, but still, again, it's fair to say that as a design choice, Grafana is your primary for the visualization of what's stored in.
Yes, Grafana is so far the primary visualization, despite VictoriaMetrics and VictoriaLogs having their own UIs. Those UIs are mostly for investigating during the incidents. They are not for building dashboards, but I hope they're very good for just ad hoc queries for finding what you need right now. For dashboarding solution, like for big analytical dashboards, we still rely on Grafana. And we have data sources like on the marketplace for VictoriaLogs and VictoriaMetrics. For traces, people can use Jaeger data source because VictoriaTraces supports Jaeger API. I hope it will also support Tempo API. So basically, you can unite and correlate signals within the Grafana, and it works nice. However, we see that Grafana is continuing to, well, they improving the ways how they do this stuff. So Grafana has whitelist for the plugins which could participate in various features. Like, for example, drill down feature in Grafana that helps you to drill down into metrics or logs. They are whitelisted to specific data sources. And those data sources are Prometheus and Loki, how you can tell. And there is no way how you can make your data source compatible with that. Even if you support all the API calls and all the queries, there is no way how you can be a part of that feature because of the whitelists. Right, so we are not happy with this, and there is nothing we can change with that. So of course, we're thinking on having an alternative UI where people can do dashboarding and user management for this. This is also part of our cloud, especially important in our cloud, because VictoriaMetrics also has the cloud solution where we let people use metrics and logs products, just clicking in the interface without actually running themselves stuff. And for cloud, it becomes more important because, of course, we don't provide Grafana in the cloud. We have our own user interfaces in the cloud. And this is where we now develop this unified interface. And we will see how successful it will be. If it will prove itself and will be useful, of course, it will get into the open source projects too.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, in the future, I hope we will have this unified interface as an alternative.
Cool. That's first of all, on the one hand, it's a bit frustrating the journey you said as an open source and community champion. The fact that Grafana is highly popular for visualization and building dashboards, but not being able to be inclusive of the open source community and the variety of the open source projects out there, so that you can just plug in. I think one of the strong points is the data source architecture, that you can just import from different data sources, combine it into a unified dashboard, and do all of that. But as you said, when some data sources cannot participate or cannot be integrated into that becomes a problem from the community side and from the capability side. So definitely interesting to see how you follow up. And maybe you said also that you're looking into Persis, maybe Persis as a foundation-led, I guess, CNCF project. Maybe this could be also an alternative that can provide something that is in the same mission statement, but maybe without these stop points to allow. So interesting to see how this evolves. And you mentioned, of course, the cloud offering. So worth noting to our audience that essentially you co-founded the VictoriaMetrics together with Aliaksandr and established this vendor company behind it, which offers an enterprise version and a cloud version of the project. So for those who are that like the project but looking for some sort of support or managed services, that's definitely the place to go. And I'm curious actually what it's like being an entrepreneur in this crowded observability space. What's your experience?
Well, I like it because observability space is super heated right now, and I can see many companies starting it over, trying to invent things. Companies that existed before also changing very much, because observability is changing with all this AI, with OpenTelemetry. It changed a lot during the last 5 years. And I like it because it is highly competitive, and you're not just doing some boring work. Every day is like a challenge. Like every day I'm checking the social media, like Reddit, Hacker News, and you always see someone trying to compete. Someone has like idea and implementing that idea. And it's just very interesting. Like no day is like another. I mean, every day is unique. And you just see how many people there trying to create something new and competitive, and it's fun. I mean, for open source especially, it is fun because all those people, they intersect at some point on some community platforms. They discussing those ideas, they bring in new issues, new questions, they observe in some unusual use cases. That's I like this, and I can't imagine myself working on something else, to be honest, right now. But yeah, we'll see how it will evolve in next years.
Oh, it's great. Of course, I'm biased, but I'm with you on this one. I think it's a hot space now, and but then again, you're also on the entrepreneur side that needs to also prove the business value and create the differentiation on the market and all of that beyond the engineering challenge. So I was curious, but yeah, I agree with you. And you mentioned the open source side and the community. So maybe it's a good opportunity for you to share of course, the main bulk of engineers working on the 3 projects. Now it's 3 are employees of VictoriaMetrics, but beyond that, who contributes to the project? Who's involved? Who do you have maintainers outside the community, the company? How do you run the community? Can you tell us a bit about this side?
Yeah. So VictoriaMetrics engineering part is pretty small, I would say. We have this 3 teams for each project, for metrics, for logs, for traces, and we have team for cloud, but those teams are small. They're like not many engineers, and we try to keep it that way because with increase from our experience, my experience, Alexander's experience, and sometimes what we've seen within VictoriaMetrics too, 2 big teams, it's very hard to make them run efficiently. It's like with there is a limited concurrent access resource when a lot of people working on the same stuff, and just resolving those conflicts takes a lot of time and takes a lot of coordination. So we prefer to propagate this maintainer mindset. Every engineer within the team is asked, or at least we try to propagate this idea of being a maintainer like to being fully responsible for the project. It might sound overwhelming, but you're not alone as a maintainer. That's a bunch of people you can discuss your problem with. But the thing is that we try to be responsible for the project as a whole. If someone doesn't like something in VictoriaMetrics, every engineer within the VictoriaMetrics team can dig into the problem and try to understand why, what is actually frustrating, how it can be improved. Maybe just a documentation issue, maybe the code change is needed, maybe user just holds it from the wrong side. It happens too. But the point is that we are responsible completely for the quality of the project. We don't have like this dedicated QAs. We don't have dedicated people who write tests. We do everything from the beginning to the end, including documentation, and we're trying to keep it up to date all the time. That's how we work within every team, and we try to grow every person and its like scope of what the person can understand and handle vertically. And so far it works good because every person is motivated and self-driven. We don't have to manage that much. Like, we don't have managers, to be honest. Like, my title is engineering manager, but it's only because I didn't come up with something something more fancy. Yeah, so that's how we do this. We don't have the outside collaborators, outside maintainers from without the company, from within the company. We of course have people who try to contribute to the project. Mostly people who contribute to the project, they solving their own problems because they run VictoriaMetrics or VictoriaLogs in their company for their use case. They see something that they don't like and they want to improve it in the upstream, so they contribute that. Not everything gets accepted, of course, and it's like just keeping up with the community is pretty time consuming. We're dedicating a lot of time of reviewing third-party pull requests, trying to understand how it will be useful for the project. Can it hurt the project in the long run from the maintenance perspective? So yeah, that's complicated. However, we very like to hire people who are actively contributing or actively participating in the community. It's not only about getting your code merged. We really appreciate when people try to educate other people or help them solve problems, because most of the problems can be solved without code. If you think better about what you're doing, it can be solved without code in the most cases, and it's the best solution usually the best solution you can make. So far, most of the people we hired, engineers, they were contributors once, and they were consistent contributors. We've seen the value, what they bring, and it's also very good capability in those people that they like what they're doing already, because it was not like just responding to the job position on the website. No, they liked the project. They wanted to participate in it. They liked communicating and delivering the change that they believe is right. And we try to see those people, try to see the intentions that they have. And if we match in what we think the project should look like, we try to hire those people. Because my internal belief is that company is based on the people, and people make the company and direction where it moves. If we will have those people with the same mind, with the same direction, understanding, and philosophy, you don't need to spend much time on managing this. That's like community within community, which knows and protects the product itself, the project as open source project, and that's the best what you can get.
So essentially, if I understand correctly, so most of the I guess folks involved in actually in the code are employees of the company. You don't have too many from outside, but you do have like active engagement from the community. Or how would you summarize like what the outside of the company? What's the type of community engagement as you characterize it?
Yes, the people with right to merge is within the company, and there are collaborators always changing. Like we have many collaborators, and we, as maintainers of the project, are responsible for reviewing their proposals and deciding whether it's will be beneficial for the open source project as it is. And of course, if contribution is valuable, we would appreciate that we will merge it. We will mention in the changelog. And if those contributions are consistent and we like how this person thinks, it will be very likely a next step in the collaboration.
Nice, very nice. Are they usually individuals, or do you see also like companies that you'd say are more active around open source projects?
Companies are usually more active and more pushy because they usually come with the case where they solve an internal company problem, and they solving it because they need their business to run or because someone else is pushing on them. And usually people from the big companies are more pushy on that, and they just proven like, hey, this is our case. In our case, we have that big load. It helps us to improve something by 10%. And they have facts, right? They have the name behind them, and we will take a look into this, of course. But sometimes it happens that this specific small change from the big companies is usually hurting the common case. So we need to be very careful about what we merge, and we're trying to be pragmatical about this. When we open source projects have to be useful for majority of cases, and every decision we make on the accepting change or rejecting change is only to protect the project itself. Because if we will accept some minor optimization that helps in one narrow case but hurt in other cases, that will be a strong no, and despite the fact which company contributed that.
Yeah. So where could people join the community? Where is that beyond the GitHub repos? Where is the discourse taking place? Let's help our audience join and chime in.
Yeah, so most of the people communicate in Slack or in Telegram channels. There are dedicated Telegram channels and Slack channels for every product. Most of the fruitful communication goes on the GitHub, though, and I treat GitHub as a social network here, because you can see every engineer on the GitHub is like having their social profile with the history of what they did, where they contributed, how they behaved in the previous. And and people pay more attention in the GitHub when they creating something or discussing something, putting more effort into the comments compared to Slack or Telegram. So if you want to be engaged in the community, I recommend checking the GitHub and Slack or Telegram if you prefer Telegram.
Sounds good. And maybe one last point before we wrap up. Can you tell us a bit about the roadmap? What's up next for VictoriaMetrics stack, I guess, across the different projects?
Yeah, right. So now we can talk about VictoriaMetrics stack or Victoria stack because it covers 3 independent signals and can cover most of the observability cases now. The next steps on the roadmap, the new features are mostly focused on VictoriaLogs right now because it's more or less new product. The next milestone for VictoriaLogs will be to support S3 for historical data. We already have that implemented. It's like on the testing phase right now on covering the rough edges. VictoriaMetrics is more or less established product. We do not actively working on any big features. So far, it works well for the majority of use cases, and adding more features will always mean adding more complexity, and we trying to fight complexity every day, trying it to keep simple. However, we mostly spending our time on improving like stability or just keeping up with how observability changes, etc., because it changes very rapidly, and you need to run very fast to stay on the same place, I would say. For traces mostly depend on VictoriaLogs. I hope we will have the Tempo API support soon, so people can get easily integrated into Grafana, though they can do this with Jaeger API even now. So that's our big milestones. And also, if S3 integration in VictoriaLogs will show itself good, I think it would be possible to move it to VictoriaMetrics too. So yeah, we will see how it will behave in VictoriaLogs.
Nice. And again, we'll have also on the show notes link. So if you have a roadmap link that I can share, happy to share that with the community, and maybe you can get some more feedback from the community and get a discussion there as well. So yeah, do follow up on the show notes to see some useful links following the episode. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much. Before you wrap up, just very quickly, a couple of updates that caught my attention. First of all, it's Kubernetes 1.36 that came out, and I think it's an interesting one to check. For example, one thing that was interesting to see is the stainless mitigation and also the observability around the controllers. So the problem of stainless in controllers coming out of the outdated view because of the controller cache is something that has been around for some time. So addressing that, and also again going back to observability as well, seeing the right metrics put in place for the kube controller manager to provide observability and monitoring about these situations. So do check out Kubernetes 1.36, some very good stuff there. And another one about OpenSearch 3.6, nothing related to Kubernetes, came out the same numbers, but also out with some interesting observability capabilities around the APM, around the agent traces for Gen AI apps, around the observability stack that enables deploying the full stack observability like OTel, Collector, Prometheus, and all of that in one command. So again, a release that's worth having a look at. And with that, I think this is all the time we have for today. So I'd like to thank you again, Roman, for joining me on this episode.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, and thanks to all our listeners for joining us on this episode. As always, all the episodes are available, including this one, on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. So do check it out. And of course, follow us on Blue Sky, LinkedIn, X, at OpenObserve to stay up to date with more deep dives and follow-ups on these topics. And of course, if you like the discussion, feel free to recommend it to your friends and share the episode with others. I'm Dr. Horovits. Thank you very much for listening. And until next month's episode, may the open source be with you.